We've been learning all about a new way of evaluating projects.
Change is embedded within a context, as you've all pointed out this morning. It will be linked to the context at a particular time. And that context will be very much embedded within the policy context and what is happening at a local level, at a national level, and at an international level. What are the drivers? Understanding the relationship between all of that and what it is that we're actually trying to do and measure at the ground level is really important in this process, which starts here with engagement, creative community engagement. And the first step is about understanding who you're engaging with, why, what you're actually doing, and how you're actually going to do it. And I'm going to work you through the methodological principles underpinning that, but it really is as simple as who, why, what, and how. So your outcomes, which will need to be at a local level, national and international if you're linking upstream to policy, but possibly more importantly, if we ignore the policy context and everything else that we're going on about, is here. The outcomes for individuals, for community members, right? So what change do they want to see as a change in their personal lives? Like, what do they want? Context is everything. If we're trying to measure change, it needs to be situated within some sort of contextual understanding, okay? So we can collect all this data, but it's quite meaningless unless we can hook it on to, well, what did that mean for that person, for that community in a particular time? We've worked through repeatedly this morning some of the communities that are clearly impacted by the policy environment and structural issues, okay? So we're not saying, we're completely acknowledging that as being an integral part of this process, right? And if access to resources is the only thing that comes up over and over and over again, then access to resources is the only thing that comes up over and over and over again. But at least we can, you know, we need to be able to document that in a way. The important thing is that the framework in itself is not mine, is not ours, it's not yours, it's co-produced, okay? So the framework in itself is co-produced with that community at that particular time, working on a particular project or initiative or event or program, and that can be, you know, however long it is, or it can be over a lifetime, or it can be over multiple lifetimes. If we're thinking about this as a paradigm shift, right? It's that conceptualization of it. It keeps going. We're really interested in the process, because that's what this is all about. All right, these are process outcomes, are just as important as your change outcomes, and just as important as your quality of life outcomes, right? So this engagement, this process of engaging is just as important. And that mechanism, as part of the process, we're actually having that relationship with people on a regular basis. That's part of the process.
We've been learning about an asset-based indicator framework and ways of measuring softer community development outcomes. A lot of it's about very personal indicators and changes. We were talking about applying it to a specific diabetes management program in East Pollokshields around the community garden there and with other community organisations. However, I can see it probably has relevance to all the work and all the projects that we work on.
First and foremost, it must be somebody with diabetes or somebody in the family who has diabetes. Discussion about the women that we're hoping to
Work with on the Women on the Mend project, which is a long-term project.
Has there been any insight through doing this and to going through the process?
Not yet, I would say. Not yet. Maybe it'll come through maybe later on in the other.
It's honed our questions more. We just, because we have this knowledge, we just sort of know who the people we're working with are, but actually having to list them and categorise them makes you think more about working beyond a narrow framework that we've always worked with.
That process of who, which is the very, very first level of the very first layer, is quite simple, But hopefully it will give you a little bit of an insight into the kind of community and the definitions of what defines that particular community. This is absolutely crucial stuff to get right at baseline. Yeah.
If you've already started working with a group, can you go in a wee bit down the line?
Well, you start where you are, yeah. You start at your baseline, you start where you are. But what you can start doing is there's absolutely no reason why you can't start plugging in what you have to feed into the point where you are, right? You can go back retrospectively and show what you've done, and you've got this evidence to show that over time, and this and this and this. But what you're measuring from now, you're not going to have this. Do you know what I mean? So, but that doesn't mean that the evidence that you've gathered is erroneous and you throw in the bin. It's how does that feed into this? Yeah, yeah.
Like when I think, I know it's bad, but I do think about in boxes and tables and different things, right? Does it come like that format to kind of track where you're at? How does it come, or is it just that's the, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So you're wanting something prescriptive and something. No, I'm not. Do you know something a bit more systematic?
That's what we're so used to, is checklists.
But it allows, it's not like so prescriptive that it stunts things, but just something to make sure you're getting through it all properly.
Well, what this is a conceptual framework that you can use however you want to use.
And that information into your...
This is your tool. You do whatever you want with it.
That's going onto my Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah. So what I'm giving you is the thinking. You do with it. You breathe life into it, and whatever mechanisms and needs work for you, but with your community. So remember, what works for you is not going to work with your community necessarily.
So the Lauriston work, can you think about conversations? It was about bringing a new community together and asking them what mattered to them.
Yeah.
And through a series of processes, and then getting to know each other, coming up with their own community manifesto.
Absolutely. That's genuine co-production in its truest form. Nobody has an agenda.
I
think it's measuring how we are with each other, and I think it's probably for me much more about breaking down the existing barriers and notions about us and them, that we're kind of all in this together, and seeing ourselves as a resource as part of that process.
When we applied this framework for the first time, we used true co-production because we just had an engagement exercise. So it came from working in Govan Hill on the streets, walking around, ethnographic, participant observation, gathering data about what means different things to different communities. Then for the Roma community, the Roma population in particular, certain issues came through that the community wanted to talk about, but in terms of assets and in terms of the mechanisms and means about wanting to engage, the community was like, well, we want to do things that involve music and singing and theatre and food, and that's what we want to do. And that came out really strong and really clear from the community. And that's what they wanted to do, right? And then I went and I kind of, which I'll get to this in a minute, spoke to the health practitioners and the people on the integration boards and, various community organizations, like, well, what do you want from this Roma population? And they're like, well, we just want to engage. We just want an opportunity to be in the same room as them, to understand what's important to them at a particular time. And that is, in its truest sense, co-production. So what we did is we used the mechanism, which I'll get to the how. In this particular instance, we put all these people together in a room, yeah? And we used singing as a mechanism for engagement. We used, singing, music. We did something with theatre, food, in order to co-produce the framework with this particular community from the start, because that's what they wanted. That's what they identified as their assets, their skills, their passions, their interests, their knowledge, blah, blah, blah. And actually, the health practitioners I was working with in the community organizations also just wanted an opportunity for pure engagement. So that's magical when that happens, right? That's great. But it's important when you're going in, particularly if you're using these approaches, to understand what you would like to achieve, right? And this is interesting in terms of power as well. Are you trying to impose have you got a particular agenda or not? So really being transparent about that. Is there a policy driver that is particularly pressing? For example, is there a new act that's been passed, or have you been set new targets or something? But being really clear and transparent about what your own motivations are going into the field is crucial. Are we just aiming to tick consultation boxes? You know, so that we can meet those targets, so that we can get the next bit of funding, so we can get the report out and the funder can be satisfied. Important, important, important stuff to reflect on. We are driving this, right? We are driving this agenda. The system is also made up of individuals, right? So what are we doing? What are we doing within this process? Reflect on that. What happens if what you want is different to what the community wants? You go in to do a diabetes thing and they're like, no, we don't want to talk about this. What happens then? What's that?
Day-to-day accounts.
Well, what are you doing about that?
That's the reason we're doing this, to make it more interesting and you know, have gardening and healthy eating and cycling and things that we
So
might
not actually focusing on the condition. That just happens to be in the focus.
Beautiful. This is about an organizational shift as well, a cultural change within organizations. So at that particular time, what we were doing is we were trying to figure out for the NHS at that moment when asset-based approaches and co-production came on the scene and practitioners were kind of saying, well, go out and apply, you know, use this in different settings. So I shadowed using something called organizational ethnography, right? It's different practitioners as they went out into the field trying to figure out how you apply asset-based approaches within that particular community. And what you got was the whole gamut. You got everything from this is wishy-washy, this doesn't make any sense at all, I need much more prescriptive measures, this doesn't, you know, to this is great, I'm drawing a mind map, I'm taking photographs, I'm in the community, I'm getting my hands dirty, what should I do? This is just about conversations. So you had within one organization the whole range of people and different practitioners. At that time as well, it was incredibly difficult to get buy-in for anything like this. And now we've got practitioners on the inside, Lara being one of them, who's really been instrumental in even getting us all here today, right? So, I mean, I myself, over like the last 5 years of my research, have watched how the organization has actually shifted, from my perspective, to at least allow space for these things to be happening.
There's certain pieces of work I'm doing that were not particularly in Marina, but there was a drive for me to continue to do that, and so making those arguments to continue to do that become more important.
I will hopefully use this even as a pilot within the community. I'm working in the Gorbers community, and maybe look to use it and implement it with a specific project and or group. See how it goes.
Are we doing participatory action research, PAR, that we like to call it? We're working with people to jointly produce knowledge with them. Okay. Are we doing asset mapping? Are we going to do something creative, something else, music or theatre or dance or knitting or gardens, or are we going to do something involving sports or food? How do we come to that particular decision? The community again, yeah. And for some communities, it may be questionnaires and surveys. In the communities that I've worked with, those have not been useful at all. Why do you think? Language, what else? Literacy, what else? Another form, trust. What are you doing? Why are you here? Why do I need to sign? What does that mean? Are you social work? You're going to take my children away? You know, all sorts of questions that maybe come up.
Mutual and personal meaning. Now, how are you going to mention it? I mean,
okay, so let's think about
I'm
this.
an atheist.
Okay, great, you are, but what about your community?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Is this stuff that people decide from the beginning that they want to measure, or is this something we have? So you would ask the group which one of these you want to measure from the beginning. Is that what you
That's
do?
what we did with the Roma community, and
Okay.
certain things came out more than others.
So they would decide. So the spirituality would be a big one. Then. There's a big religious.
So we're assuming, right? We're
Assuming, yes.
And the community actually come up with their definition.
All right, excellent.
I think it's about measuring the great work we do and the change we impact in communities in a much more meaningful way than we had before.
So we use this template when you're co-producing the framework with your particular community, yeah, as a starting point for discussion. Yeah? Quite often we get lost in the language of trying to achieve these overarching, high-level policy outcomes, which we're going to get to in a second when we get to policy, that we actually forget that what we need to do is figure out what outcomes are important and best for that particular community at that particular time. How do you know when you're engaging on a diabetes project that somebody's not going to bring up an issue of domestic violence and you might not be able to signpost them somewhere else? Right? How do you know when you're working on someone on a mental health project that you might not discover that perhaps there's a literacy issue or a language issue, or they're unemployed, and you might be able to signpost them towards some sort of service that will help them at that particular moment? Yeah?
And I think that happens all the time and we're just not good at capturing it.
That's true.
Maybe you want to take photographs, maybe you want to take pictures, maybe any mechanism, any means is absolutely fine as long as you're capturing it. If you're not recording it, it's lost. Yeah? And really importantly, if you're not recording it quite systematically, yeah, this is a commitment. If we're trying to sort of evidence this change, we have to keep going back. We have to keep looking at the indicator. We have to keep asking the questions. We have to keep re-engaging. We have to keep checking in. Yeah? You can pick and choose whatever means of data collection, whatever methods of engagement you want all along the way. If the community decides that what they want in terms of trust for them is to mean that they feel closer to you as a practitioner, your reflective diary is going to be a crucial part of that story. Yeah? So that is going to be one of the means of data collection. So you're looking at what other databases, mixed methodologies, quantitative measures, the Scottish Household Survey. Perhaps, let's say that there's an indicator in social isolation, right? Perhaps it gives you some insights into what's happening in certain neighborhoods. Perhaps you can use that data alongside what you've got to tell a bigger picture. We always do, we flip back, and then we kind of think back to, well, how do we go back? We think now we're evaluating, as if evaluation is something that's separate to what we're actually doing. This is all part of the same jigsaw. Does that make sense? It's just a way of working. It's just a way of being. So there are lots of examples in this of means of data collection, creative approaches, diaries, reflective diaries, talking about visual stimuli, talking about observational things, what kind of interviews you may be able to use, how you may be able to segue into quantitative scales that already exist, like your well-being measurement scales, all that kind of stuff. Keeping in mind that what we're doing is we're linking again back to outcomes that are defined by that particular community, what do they want, quality of life, and also working through the process. And linking to the final layer, which is your policy, all right? We're not in a bubble. We're working within a social, cultural, and political context, and we need to acknowledge that context in order to evidence any particular change, okay? So we need to, when we jump across the levels, the thing that came up for us all the time was the structure, much like for us today. Access to resources, working with the minority ethnic communities that I work with, stigma and racism came up a lot, okay? Repeatedly, okay? So when I was asking them, how do you feel more trusted? They say people stop being racist towards me. All right, so racism, we're talking structural level, starts coming up all the time. Right, so one of the things that we're trying to measure in improving health and well-being through community-based approaches is reducing racism. I mean, but that's what they are saying is linked to their health and well-being, yeah? So we're documenting this stuff here at the structural level as well, which is absolutely crucial to this. If they're saying they need access to certain resources, we know the realities of our situation. It's about having that conversation. It's about documenting the realities of our circumstances, of our jobs. If we keep trying, and then what we show is that we keep coming up against the same hurdles, at least we have the evidence, the data to show that what the community has asked for and the ways in which they have. We are trying to, but actually we have this roadblock. And that roadblock may not be there, or it may be strikingly obvious. stigma, racism, something which is beyond our control.
That is what's hand though, for instance, Community Empowerment Act, unless it's like, okay, communities that are already empowered will have heard about it and go, oh, we can now do this or that, but the people who maybe need it the most maybe should know. That's how you really bring about change.
That's true.
Go, right.
Yeah, that's true. But it's what's relevant to that in the context of that particular project. It might be great that we're discussing it, especially if you're working with refugees, so well informed about international affairs.
Yeah.
But if you're working with people who've got severe alcohol problems, just getting past, is a very different concept.
Some of the indicators that you can show in terms of civic engagement, awareness of human rights. If people start becoming vocal, participants in the democratic racism, boom, you found a direct link upstream to policy through something that they've identified.
Measuring humanity for me has never been more important. I think about all the changes in the city, I think about the challenges that are coming in, all the new communities that are coming in, lack of community cohesion and people being already challenged communities, being asked to accommodate more and more people, but that being and people's perceptions being skewed about access to resources, and that creating conflict. And I think if we're in the business of beginning to look at measuring humanities in that way, we might create a better dialogue for people, and we need to be in that and doing that and understand that process to be able to influence how people feel about being in their community, I suppose.